Welcome to the deep dive. It's great to have you with us. Today we're doing a deep dive into something you actually asked us about, something that's really buzzing around the F1 paddock right now. It's all about well, the surprisingly fluid driver situation over at Red Bull, especially looking ahead to 2026.
Yeah, it's a real moving target, isn't it? I mean, they just made a change this season, swapping drivers between the teams.
Exactly, and yet the focus is already shifting. So we've gathered a whole load of recent analysis reports from various, F1 blogs and outlets to try and figure out what's really going on.
And that's our mission today, really. To unpack all of that, we want to look at the key players, understand Red Bull's thinking, or, try to, and figure out what it all means for that very important seat alongside Max Verstappen in 2026.
Yeah, the tension is fascinating. They shuffle drivers now, but the chat is already about 2 years down the line. All because, a rookie is suddenly making waves while the guy currently in the main car is facing some, let's say, tricky questions. Okay, let's get into it.
It really is quite the turnaround from what people expected, maybe just a short while ago. If you think back, Liam Lawson had that brief shot in the Red Bull racing car. Then it was Yuki Tsunoda who got the seat from the Japanese Grand Prix onwards, with Lawson going back to Racing Bulls.
Right, that was the setup.
Yeah.
But now the focus seems to have shifted pretty dramatically. And the reports we looked at, they explain why.
They really do. Over at Racing Bulls, where Lawson went back to, the big story, the undeniable story, is ISAK HAJAR. The analysis we've seen basically says he's been consistently and pretty comprehensively outperforming Lawson since then.
And that level of performance from a rookie in his first year, well, it's seriously impressive. It sounds like it's making Red Bull rethink their whole driver hierarchy internally.
Yeah, what's really striking is just the sheer pace of his results, his point scoring. Think about this. Since Tsunoda moved up to Red Bull Racing, he's scored, 7 points across 7 GPs and a sprint.
Okay, 7 points.
Right. In that exact same period, HAJAR, in the Racing Bulls car, has scored 21 points.
21. Wow. That's a huge difference, especially given one's meant to be the junior team.
Isn't it just? And it puts HAJAR 9th overall in the driver standings. He's second only to Max Verstappen among all the Red Bull contracted drivers right now. More points than Tsunoda and Lawson combined during that specific period.
Wow. Okay, those are stark numbers. You can't really argue with those.
Yeah.
So the reports are suggesting HAJAR is now really emerging as Red Bull's kind of preferred long-term bet, maybe for 2026.
That seems to be the direction of travel, yeah. And it comes just as Tsunoda seems to be, struggling a bit. He had a reasonably okay start at Red Bull, but he doesn't seem to be building on it consistently.
Now, hold on. Before everyone thinks Tsunoda's out next week, the analysis we saw suggests he's probably safe for this season, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The material calls the chance of him being replaced mid-season an unlikely worst-case scenario. It would probably take a complete meltdown in form, maybe, another weekend like he had in Spain, which was really bad.
Okay, so his seat seems okay for the rest of 2025. But the 2026 conversation is definitely heating up because of HAJAR. So what is it about this rookie that's got Red Bull so impressed, especially given where things stood at the start of the year?
Well, yeah, there's a bit of irony here, isn't there? When HAJAR got that Racing Bull seat for 2025, some of the reports suggested it was almost like by default.
Right. Lawson moved up. They needed someone.
Exactly. HAJAR was next in line, finished second in F2. But the reports say Red Bull wasn't, massively convinced back then. They apparently had doubts about his approach, his mentality maybe, and his FP1 outings in older cars hadn't exactly blown them away.
So this huge shift in how they see him, it's happened pretty much purely since the season started.
Precisely, yeah. Despite, a pretty terrible debut in Australia crashing on the formation lap after qualifying well.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Not ideal.
Not ideal at all. But since then, he seems to have totally convinced Red Bull that he might just be the second quickest driver they actually have on their books right now. And crucially, he's becoming really dependable too.
Dependability. That's huge for a rookie. What does that look like, on track, according to the sources?
Well, look at the stats since Australia. 9 Grand Prix weekends, and he scored points in 5 of them, including a really strong run at Suzuka early on, which is always a tough track. And while other big-name rookies this year, like, say, Antonelli or Behrman, have had some visible struggles, HAJAR'S just been consistently there. Top 10 discussion, quali, race.
And the reports really hammered home his qualifying consistency, didn't they?
They did. So 9 qualifying sessions so far. He's made Q3, the top 10 shootout, 5 times. But here's the really key bit. He has never dropped out in Q1, not once.
Never in Q1. For a rookie, that's properly consistent.
It really is. He also made SQ3 in the Miami Sprint Quali, especially when you consider he apparently had less testing in older F1 cars compared to some rivals. It shows this amazing knack for just getting close to the car's maximum potential on that one lap, time after time. Even on slightly off days, like Bahrain maybe, it's been fine margins. But he hasn't had those big Q1 shockers.
And how does he stack up directly against the other Red Bull juniors he's raced alongside?
Yeah, the numbers there are pretty telling too. When he was with Tsunoda for those first 2 races, their average qualifying gap was tiny, like 9,000ths of a second, basically identical.
Okay.
But since Lawson came back to Racing Bulls, Hajar has been, on average, 0.2 quicker than him in qualifying. The reports really stress that, Australia aside, his ability to just nail it when needed has made a massive impression inside Red Bull.
They also touched on his emotional side. We've seen bits of that on the broadcasts.
Oh, he's definitely not a robot. There was that time he smacked the steering wheel at Imola after a Q3 mistake.
Yeah, I remember that.
And the physical discomfort at Suzuka seemed like he went into a bit of a negative spiral before pulling it back for the race, plus hitting the wall twice in Monaco practice. But the key thing, according to the analysis, is that he seems able to process that frustration or whatever it is pretty quickly. He composes himself and then delivers when it actually counts in quali in the race. So far, those moments haven't really hurt his end result.
Okay, so beyond just this season's performance at Racing Bulls, was there anything else that maybe flagged him as a potential top team guy for Red Bull?
Well, the sources did mention something interesting. The postseason Abu Dhabi test last year, the young driver test bit, both Hajar and Tsunoda drove the main Red Bull car that day.
Ah, okay. Direct comparison, sort of?
Sort of. You always have to take test times with a massive pinch of salt, obviously. Different fuel loads, run plans. But Hajar was actually slightly quicker overall across the whole day. And maybe more importantly, Red Bull apparently identified him internally as being the quicker driver throughout the different runs they did. That raw speed, even in a test in their top car, it definitely made an impression.
Right, so he showed speed in the RB car itself, and now he's backing it up with consistency, racecraft, points in the second team.
Exactly. It's that consistent delivery, especially for a rookie still only 20 years old. That's why he's now seen as, well, not just credible for promotion, but maybe the most logical internal candidate if Red Bull decides they need a change from Tsunoda long term.
But there's a timing question here, isn't there? Promoting him for 2025 wasn't the plan. And maybe promoting him for 2026 could still be seen as, well, a bit early by Red Bull's usual standards, or at least based on past experiences.
Yeah, the analysis definitely flags that. Promoting him for next year, 2026, would carry that risk. The risk of repeating what happened with drivers like Gasly, Albon, maybe even Lawson in his brief stint, promoted maybe just a bit too soon into that high-pressure environment.
Right.
If Hajar moved up for 2026, having done all of 2025, he'd actually have fewer F1 races under his belt than Vettel or Verstappen did when they made the jump to the senior team. But, and this is maybe the crucial bit, he would have had more races than Gasly, Albon, and Lawson did. The reports note it worked out for the champions, less so for the others, so it's not clear-cut.
And that brings us nicely to the other side of this whole thing, Yuki Tsunoda's situation. The sources seem pretty clear that he really needs to start turning things around quite soon.
Yeah, he definitely does. He started off at Red Bull Racing looking like, a pretty clear upgrade on Lawson in that seat, focusing on those consistent lower points finishes, just bringing the car home reliably. But lately, worryingly, there have been more disappointing results creeping in, especially in qualifying.
Like Imola and Spain.
Exactly. The Q1 crash at Imola was bad, and then qualifying dead last in Spain. That was pretty shocking. And his race wasn't great either.
And if you watch that weekend, he sounded completely lost himself, didn't he?
He really did. Reports quoted him saying it just didn't stack up with how the car felt. He said something like he felt he was making good progress, and then suddenly it just drops like hell.
Mm-hmm.
In Spain specifically, he was 0.6 slower than Verstappen in Q1. That's a huge gap, especially as Max did his lap earlier when the track should have been theoretically a bit slower.
And it wasn't just a one-off bad qualifying lap. The analysis suggested it was kind of a weekend-long issue for him there.
That's right. The reports indicate he was just off the pace pretty much all weekend in Spain, struggling with sliding, both front and rear. Just couldn't get comfortable, and apparently that persisted right into qualifying, even though it looked like he might have been running a bit more rear wing than Max.
Ah, okay. And that's often a sign, isn't it? A driver needing more wing suggests they can't handle the car's balance like the other guy.
It can be, yeah. Especially with these Red Bull cars that seem so sensitive, it suggests they can't generate the downforce in that same aggressive, planted way Max seems to thrive on.
Now, to be fair, the sources did offer some potential reasons, some mitigation for Tsunoda's recent dip, right?
Yes, that's important context. He's reportedly been on a slightly different car spec to Max, still missing the latest floor upgrade. Apparently because of the damage from his Imola crash, they haven't had enough parts.
Okay. And how much difference does that make?
Well, the thinking is it's maybe only worth about 1/10 of a second in pure lap time. But importantly, it's also part of Red Bull's effort to make the car's setup window a bit wider, easier to manage. So maybe there's a bit more lap time and just a better feeling with the car once he gets that update.
Okay, so maybe some improvement is possible there. But even allowing for that, the gap sometimes looks pretty big. And this raises that bigger question the analysis really gets into. The car itself. How it behaves for anyone who isn't Max Verstappen.
Yeah, this is where it gets really, really interesting and maybe a bit worrying for Red Bull long term. The material highlights this clear pattern. It's almost predictable now. Verstappen's teammate ends up half a second, sometimes more, adrift on weekends when things aren't just perfectly aligned for them.
And the car, particularly this year's RB21, is described as being what? On a knife edge?
Exactly. On a knife edge, when it's at its absolute peak, it needs this very specific, super smooth driving style to generate and keep the peak downforce through the corners. The reports even quote Tsunoda telling a Dutch broadcaster something like, to use the downforce properly, you need to drive smoothly, and basically you need to drive like Max.
Wow. He actually said that.
Yep. And the reports suggest the feeling inside Red Bull is that Tsunoda, just like Lawson, Perez, Albon, Gasly before him, they need to kind of accept a slightly lower absolute ceiling, stop trying to perfectly replicate Max's unique high-wire style, because maybe only Max can actually do it consistently in that car.
And this really ties it all together, doesn't it, this pattern? You have these really good drivers, maybe not generational talents like Max, but very, very good F1 drivers who just look significantly worse than they are when they're trying to keep up with Verstappen in a car that seems tuned specifically to his incredible sensitivity.
It's so well established now. Gasly, Albon, Perez, Lawson, and now seemingly Tsunoda, they've all, to different degrees, really struggled to consistently match Max in these specific Red Bull cars.
It does make you wonder if Red Bull are almost designing cars that only Max can truly get the maximum out of.
That's a crucial point the analysis touches on. There are these deeper questions about why Red Bull keeps ending up with cars that have these traits. And the challenge then becomes finding any second driver who can consistently cope. It seems like constantly changing teammates, hoping for a magic bullet, might be as futile as just sticking indefinitely with drivers who struggle to adapt. It's a real bind.
Which brings us right back around to ISAK HAJAR, because the reports mention that the Racing Bulls car he's driving now, it's arguably one of the easier cars to drive on the grid. More forgiving.
Yeah, described as quite benign, relatively forgiving to handle, almost the opposite, it sounds like, of the hypersensitive RB21 Max is driving.
So looking ahead, the really fascinating thing is trying to figure out if HAJAR's success in that easier Racing Bulls car, will it genuinely translate? Will it translate to the highly capricious, max-tuned Red Bull car? Especially if those core traits carry over into the 2026 rules.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Assuming the car philosophy doesn't completely change for 2026, which is a big assumption maybe, but likely something Red Bull's thinking about. HAJAR'S current success doesn't automatically guarantee he can handle the very specific, very difficult demands of driving that top car alongside Max.
But his performance right now is undeniable. It's certainly given Red Bull a clear choice to think about.
Absolutely. He has. If this experiment with Tsunoda doesn't work out, doesn't reach the level they need, HAJAR is presented in the analysis as the leading internal candidate. Maybe, based on current form, the only truly realistic internal candidate for promotion.
What about looking outside the Red Bull stable? Are there any obvious external options? The sources seem pretty thin on that front.
Yeah, they really did. Signing a proven top driver, someone who could genuinely challenge Max, like a Leclerc or a Norris, that's likely way too expensive. Plus, you get into all sorts of team dynamic issues, wouldn't you?
Oh, definitely. Headaches.
Right. And of the drivers who might be available, maybe, few seem like an obvious fit next to Max. George Russell gets mentioned in speculation sometimes, but given their history, that seems incredibly unlikely, very problematic.
Yeah, that would be fireworks.
Wouldn't it? Valtteri Bottas is another name that pops up. Red Bull apparently talked to him seriously before, but the reports suggest they've kind of gone cool on that idea now.
So it really does feel like the internal path, potentially with Hajar, is the most probable route if Tsunoda doesn't find another gear.
It looks that way, yes.
Well.
Although the analysis does pose that really interesting question. Is promoting Hajar early, even if he's doing brilliantly now, actually good for his career? Good for his long-term development? What if he then struggles to adapt to that specific Red Bull car and the Verstappen dynamic, and it creates another puzzle lower down too? What happens to Lawson? Or even Tsunoda if he's replaced but stays in the system? They have other juniors like Arvid Lindblad coming through too, but the main focus right now is definitely this Hajar-Tsunoda question for 2026.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together then. The key takeaways from this deep dive seem to be, first, ISAK Hajar's genuinely impressive, consistent performance at racing bulls. It's creating real buzz at Red Bull, raising his stock significantly.
And that contrasts sharply with Yuki Tsunoda's more recent struggles in the main Red Bull seat after that initially okay start.
Then there's this huge underlying factor, the specific nature of the Red Bull car. It seems historically incredibly difficult for anyone not named Max Verstappen to master, regardless of their talent.
Right. And that leaves Red Bull with this really complex dilemma for 2026. Hajar looks fantastic right now, maybe even their second best driver overall, but promoting him very soon feels risky based on past experiences.
Meanwhile, Tsunoda needs to find consistency, find that next level, which history shows is really, really hard in that seat.
And on top of all that, the report suggests there are just no obvious slam dunk alternatives available outside their own driver pool.
So understanding these dynamics, the car's traits, the pressure cooker environment next to Max, the timing of these promotions, it's really key to looking beyond just the results sheet, isn't it? To see why Red Bull's facing this specific tricky situation.
Absolutely. And it raises one final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Given this history, this pattern of talented drivers, Gasly, Albon, Perez, maybe now Tsunoda struggling alongside Verstappen in a car seemingly built around his unique abilities, does Hajar's current brilliant success in the Racing Bulls car, which sounds much more forgiving, does that really mean he can handle the top seat? Or is there a chance, however talented he is, that he's potentially being set up for a challenge that could actually stall his development simply by stepping into that unique Red Bull Verstappen dynamic? It's definitely going to be fascinating to watch how this unfolds.